I call the Appomattox County Board of Supervisors work session meeting to order. Welcome everyone that is in attendance, and I'm glad you escaped from the sleep you had earlier. Probably didn't know. At any rate, welcome to the meeting, and at this time, we'll stand for our invocation. Pledge of allegiance to Jesus following our invocation. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father God, we just thank you for giving us this awesome responsibility, and we ask that we have the wisdom of Solomon to deal with the issues presented before the board tonight. We ask you to be with our EMS people, our sheriff's department, firefighters, and especially our soldiers that are stationed around the world, that you continue to protect them and keep them in your hands. We ask now for safety travel from this meeting at the end and for everyone here. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Ms. Adams.
Yes, sir.
Does anyone have any items to be added to the agenda? Is there a motion to the floor?
I have something to be deleted from the agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
Item number 2, Mr. Vince from Gentry Law Trades Board Law Firm, has become a deal that he will not be making. So he plans to come table.
Okay. Any other item? Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Approve the deletion of number 2?
So moved.
Is that second?
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the 6 o'clock work session is relative to our budget that we've been working on. And what I'm doing, I'm passing around some spreadsheets because also I'm holding the budget at the end of tonight. Tuesday and also. Then I have another sheet that's outside the sheet as well. Your notice is color coded. Okay, the easiest thing to do at this point, I think, would be to look at the longer spreadsheets that we have, and that's relative to the departmental requests. What we tried to do is include all of the requests for every department that we received. And I think we talked about this at a prior meeting, we had some people up here in person, and we had discussions. So what staff has done, we went through, and the ones marked in green, we recommended and put into the draft budget. There are other items for discussion, and they would be the items that are marked in red. So either you can discuss those tonight, or if you'd like to take them with you and talk about them Tuesday night, or if you have questions while we're redoing it tonight, I just want to address those.
I'm sure about this opportunity. That's it. You might find it good time.
Or if you want to call anytime between now and then, we can explain why they're marked as red. Some of those are just, things for consideration that maybe we may not have talked about, or we may not have made a decision, or we have not received documentation. So if it's anything that you need additional information for, you'll reach out to staff, and we'll be happy to attend.
So we'll be voting on these issues tonight.
No, we're still in the rough draft portion of the budget. I think, I'm not sure which night that the school board votes on their request, but we have to see that. If you notice at the very top of the sheet, she made, thanks to Wanda, she made extra copies, and I think some of it, so we have plenty of copies. So as you just look over this, are there any questions that you have on a very, we're at a very rough process of the completion of the budget?
You seen it, excuse me, you seen it,
No, I will add that the Commonwealth's attorney will have a new request to come before the board at Tuesday's meeting. He's found out that one of the positions in his office is not going to be grant funded as it has been in the past. So he's asked to appear before the board again at Tuesday's meeting to discuss the county potentially taking the funding over for that position.
yes, sir.
That's correct, yeah.
I don't know what it's probably, I don't know whether it's advisable to ask, but they're gonna do the study, which means they do the study and it comes back and the state's gonna pick it up. We've already picked it up, but they may not pick it up. I think we ought to, I don't want to run the time of turning short, but anything we do all the time ought to be done after the study is done.
And hopefully, if that study is performed this year, they have funding through December 31st, so it covers half a year of that position. So maybe it would be a time then that you could reevaluate after the study.
Apparently, I've never seen when the state study funding, anybody's funding goes down. It usually goes, it usually will get more positions. It may save us to wait to see what happens with that study. I assume it has to report to the next year on the seventh, so it should be finished by, but that's a,
I would hope so, yeah. And that's based on their caseload, and I think their caseload may be increasing too. So like you said, it may pick up funding for that position.
you said that position is funded through these,
Through December of this year, that's correct. And it's a part-time position, so everything's, as far as hourly rate and everything's set for that position. Included in this budget is the 5% salary increase for all departments that was recommended to all state employees and the school teachers. And I think we had talked about this previously, so I wanted to add it to show you what that would look like. It's a snapshot, and it's an increase about, I think it's $140-some thousand, and that's salary and benefits.
Just for information purposes, Ms. Allen,
Yes, sir.
has Commonwealth Attorney signed MOU?
No, he hasn't. And if you'll notice, the numbers are questionable for the electoral board and the registrar's office. So those budgets have not been updated in this report. because we're meeting with the registrar, I think it's this week, to talk about the proposed renovations and everything that she had asked for. We're also performing a study. Some of the counties have reached out to us asking how many poll workers we staff in our polling places. And they're doing a comparison also. A temporary number that's been reported to me from the state level is they typically staff 3 people in the polling places is what they recommend from the state level. And then there's a 4th extra person that serves as like I guess a fill-in in case somebody needs to take a break or something. So I've asked for John Spencer to reach out to the localities and get that same report so that we know that people that have basically the same number of people registered to vote in their localities see what it's costing them to staff their polling places. And we can find out additional information if you would like that, since we're performing the study.
Well, just for FYI, how many did we have last election?
94, I believe.
94.
It's like, Mr. Chairman, I think Spout Spring had like 12 workers.
My.
That's the same amount of workers we had before we had the early voting. We had a huge percentage vote early, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, it was almost 50% is what they reported. So we should have that information at Tuesday's meeting also, so we can better, you can take a snapshot at their budgets.
Well, our population hadn't increased over the last 10 years much, has it? I didn't think so.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr. Ingram.
breakdown, email that we received from the registrar was Vera had 6 workers, Pamplin 9, Chap 6, Spout Spring 13, US 460 12, Stonewall 10, Courthouse 13, Oakville 8, and AG 7.
Something wrong with that picture, like to me.
And I think in that email, she has explanation, so if you want to reference that before Tuesday also for some of those positions.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram.
So are there any other questions with the departmental request that you have before you?
Oh, no. Sound like a radio.
I don't know, Bobby's in here. On the one sheet, that's outside agencies. You could see with those requests, of course, the greens are the amounts that are included so far in the proposed budget. The reds are not, and we tried to put an explanation there.
Mr. Evans.
Along the lines of money, are we getting some more federal money? Are we getting some more federal government, some more money given?
My understanding from a memo that I received last week is that we are included in the Recovery Act, and money should be coming to the locality, half of it within the next couple of months, the second half within a 12-month period after we receive the first payment.
3 million?
It's somewhere around $3 million.
Man,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
what's the criteria for what you can spend it on?
Well, they haven't developed that yet, so that's forthcoming. They said it would change, they just didn't say what the change would be. So, from the first round, first and second round.
Well, Mr. Hogan, Mr. Abbott, I know you all are anxiously awaiting for all this to appear on the surface.
We want to do it right. I said that about this already one time. So we don't have to make it up the following year.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hinkle,
I'd just like to note again that the American Legion Post increase of $500, that's the internal flame, and the reason they wanted the additional 500, increasing it to 1,500, is because their propane bill was over $1,200 this year.
wow. Dramatic increase.
And that is included in the budget, yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hogan,
do we know if the school system will have a handle on their budget by our meeting Tuesday night, or is it, you said they had to still vote on it? Do they know how much they're getting from the state yet?
We have a rough figure that what was proposed during the General Assembly. So yes, we do have that number from DOE.
Okay.
The talking one was, like, after we came up tonight. But I see request for additional funds. We got an ADM yet.
No, she said to current, she gave me a number that she's prepared to talk to the board tonight, but usually the state bases on that March 31st ADM numbers, what they base that basic aid funding on.
so if I understood you right, Ms. Adams, it'll be not before March 31st, more than likely.
Right. She has a number that she can provide currently, but the state funding is based on that March 31st. Okay, I think all of you have a copy of the budget calendar, and I made some revisions to it, basically when your public hearing would be. The advertising and everything is still projected for the week of March the 29th. You would have your public hearing at the April 19th board meeting. And rather than hold a special meeting, I went in and scheduled it for the 17th, if that's what the board would like to do to actually approve the budget.
And that's kind of normal for time of year.
Typically, they say they like for it to be approved by May 1st just because of school contracts. That hasn't been a problem in the past when we approved it later.
Does this kind of coincide with everyone's calendar?
The 23rd and the 29th, those dates did not change. We just added that extra work session in there. Rather than finalizing the budget, we put it in as work session if needed.
All right.
If you don't mind, if you could make a motion to just adopt this so we can make sure it's publicized and everybody has the most updated information.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept the changes.
Is that a second? Discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you, Ms. Adams, on that.
You're welcome. Unless you have questions, that's all we intended to go over this evening. I do have a handout that's going to be an agenda item. You may want to go ahead and pass around and have a moment to look at that.
Well, this is a whole lot to consume. So just part of the agenda tonight going to be?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That may address some of the questions if there are any. You had asked about the current ADM is 2,200, is what Dr. Bennett reported.
Is that more or less than previous year?
I'm not exactly sure, let's see.
Like to me, it's maybe a little bit more, isn't it?
I think the projection was based on 2,190.9. So yes, it is a few more students. And some of this information, Ben, is relative to a lease on the handout that you have. The county attorney is prepared to talk about that in closed session this evening.
Do you, Ms. Adams, do you happen to know on page two, the floor plan, there on page 2? I don't see legends, what, brown, blue, red. Do you have that?
I think that legend was the green was the lease space when you renewed their lease, and the red was what wasn't leased, but it was included in the new lease. Is that correct? Yes. In 2018, I believe.
Thank you.
Did that make sense? Did I?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, we got 5 more minutes. Poll clock back there is not gonna make it. Yeah.
It's not going to,
Poll clock. Any other items, Ms. Adams, I want to bring up in this work session?
no, sir, unless the board has questions.
Questions, being the board?
I might have liked to
sorry.
If you would like to move to some of the other agenda items.
All
Dr.
right.
Lashley said you could,
Thank you.
since there's no allotted time for the 6:30 meeting.
I understand. What it looks like that what we can move to is action item number 4, resolution of opposition to the personal Joshua Falls to Gladstone Power Line route through Appomattox County. Any comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hips?
I think the title speaks for itself there, but essentially, and you can read the language of the resolution if someone would bring that up on the screen, but essentially the resolution would be to state the board's opposition to eminent domain of property in the the mapped area there, which would run through my district and a portion of Mr. Abbott's district, and with no benefit of this project to our county, and certainly none to our actual constituents in some way. You know, when they take property by eminent domain, of course, there would be some measure of compensation, but that's determined by them. And if the property has been in your family for 100 years, or if this property is of some sentimental value, or your hunting property, or whatever it may be, that really doesn't matter. And they're going to run their power grid through this to connect, for the increase of their own power grid, which, by the way, again, when I say it doesn't benefit our county, it doesn't benefit our county in the sense of the grid either, because if you look at a coverage map of who provides electricity in our county, I couldn't get an actual census on this number, Mr. Rourke. We didn't. No. There was no exact number that I could come up with besides getting on the phone and trying to locate what addresses were on the map and all that sort of thing, which there's essentially, for the purposes of this discussion, no customers on AEP in the county. And I mean that, maybe there's a dozen. So if someone wants to fact check me, I'm not saying literally zero, but for practical purpose, it is. And so I would just ask for your support on this, that you guys would join with me and Mr. Abbott in supporting our constituents and expressing our disapproval of the project. And so I would move that we accept the resolution as written.
Yes, sir.
This project starts in Amherst County. When you cross the river at Appomattox and back across through the Amherst and Nelson, I can't speak for the EP, but it obviously looks like the economic decision. They think crossing the river and coming over here cheaper than going through Amherst and Nelson. So, this is a resolution to the State Corporation Commission. They just wrote it, and this is just expressing out the
Motion has been duly made and second. Discussion. We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Hinkle.
Aye.
Mr. Hips.
Aye.
Mr. Abbott. Mr. Hogan.
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Okay. So that takes care of item number 4.
Chairman, I do want to add, just for future reference, at some point, we would have a right to be a party to this SEC action. So it may be a conversation we want to have, whether we want to actually become a party to, it's a form of litigation. The Corporation Commission, I've never done an electric case, but I've done a water case. And so that is something that, we can't consider if we want to actually get involved in the proceedings.
Okay. Thank you for that info. Let's do item number 5, the co-joint incentive agreement. Please transfer by consent and appropriate $25,000 to 8105/6007 Economic Development Special Projects Fund to reimburse the EDA for an incentive agreement, annual payment to Kojana LLC. Discussion? Motion duly made, is that second? Discussion? Have a roll call vote. Mr. Hinkle? Mr. Hips? Mr. Abbott? Mr. Hogan?
Aye.
Also vote aye. Okay. I think now we can go back to the very beginning. And at this point is a citizen public comment period. The time is provided by the board to allow citizens the opportunity to address the board on issues of importance to the citizen. No individual citizen shall be permitted to address the board for more than 3 minutes. And see, Mr. Rourke's looking to see if anybody signed up. Something doesn't happen up there. Did anybody sign up?
Someone's signing right now. Let's see.
Yeah.
I thought you got kidnapped.
We was getting ready to call the FBI. Thank you, Mr. Roy. Okay, Mr. Joe Billings?
Hello, I'm Joe.
Hello, oh, if you don't mind, come to the speaker stand, and when you get to the speaker stand, please state your name and address for the record.
Yes.
Thank you.
I am Joe Billings. I live at 5567 Wildway Road, putting me in Piney Mountain District. And I'm here tonight to urge the board to consider a resolution that has now been passed by 4 Virginia counties to condemn the practice of forced organ harvesting in China. Loudoun County was the most recent county to pass this resolution condemning this heinous crime. And because of the location of Dulles Airport there, they are concerned that traffic to and from China could be bringing some of the contraband organs here for transplantation to U.S. citizens.
Excuse me, Ms. Billings, but you're addressing the board.
I'm sorry, yes. In communist China today, there are religious sects, including Christians, but primarily the Falun Gong sect. And they are rounded up, they are imprisoned, their tissue is typed, their blood types are taken, and at such a time as a member of the Communist Chinese Party is in need of an organ, these people are murdered and their organs are transplanted. This is an ongoing practice, well established. We know that it's going on. Other nations around the globe are trying to work to put pressure on the Chinese communists to stop this. There is pending legislation in the U.S. Senate as well as in the House of Representatives to prohibit any organs coming into the United States. Loudoun County, Fairfax County, Shenandoah County, and Prince William County have passed resolutions condemning the practice. I feel that if Appomattox will join those groups of counties, this will add to the incentivize, at least I'm sure, would imagine that Congressman Good would vote yes on this legislation, but it's a bipartisan issue, and I would think that this would add pressure to Senator Tim Kaine as well as Senator Warner to promote that legislation. So it's in our 3 minutes are up, but I think I urge the board to consider passing such a resolution.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Uh-oh, it's gonna be trouble. I don't know if I can read this.
I withdraw at this point.
You, okay, thank you. My eyes are not what they used to be. Mary Hines?
Well, she's with the group that's on the agenda for Pamplin.
What'd you say?
She's with the group from the town of Pamplin.
Oh, so she don't want to speak now. Okay. Is it anyone else that would like to address the board who failed to sign up? Feel free to do so. Okay, thank you. Next is our appearances, and we are here to welcome Mrs. Linda Smith, External Affairs, and James Beasley, Dominion Energy. Now, I said Ms.
Mr. Chairman, James Beasley.
Thank you.
I'm going to clarify, Ms. Smith has had a personal appointment this afternoon and couldn't make it, so I'm going to be representing her. Also with me is Mr. Todd Flowers, my colleague with Business Development. We're not going to take up too much of your time. Ms. Adams, I don't know if it's not, I can.
We had it, but I don't know where it is.
We had a PowerPoint presentation, but I can wing it if that's.
So this is the one
From Dominion.
tell me if this looks familiar. Is that what happened?
No.
Yeah, that's yours.
That's Kelly's
Still
right
one
there.
I've received today.
That's fine. We will. I would just quickly go through my spiel, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Flowers. Really wanted to. We are, as a company at Dominion Energy, we're headquartered in Richmond. Obviously, we are fortunate enough to have 3,300 customers that reside in Appomattox County, and but we're also looking for development activities associated with solar generation and renewables. Not only solar, but also battery storage is also popping up as well. We have been addressing some of your peer counties in the region and wanted to take this opportunity just to talk about our renewable activities. And also just wanted to really just talk about our storm outage restoration as well that coincided about 3 weeks ago, and talked about during the peak of the operation or restoration, you had about almost 2,000 customers within the county without power on the Valentine's Day itself. Roughly 24 hours later, we were able to close that gap to about 500, and we were able to restore fully most of the folks within that, if not that evening on Monday, the following day on Tuesday. And we've been communicating quite very vigorously with your county staff, with emergency operation calls, with communications going out email-wise as well. And if we're always amenable to hearing other type of feedback, if we're not, if you need additional information or points when we go out and do our outage restoration. And additionally, I wanted to let you know about our broadband initiatives that we are going and taking place right now across the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had a pilot program that came out of a General Assembly session in 2019 carried by Delegate Israel Quinn out in Southwest Virginia. And that kind of opened up the door to kind of looking at utilities to be the middle mile provider. And what does middle mile provider means? That we will take it up to a point, up to a substation point or to some sort of device, and an internet service provider will take that and string it to an end user. And so we have about 5 projects right now. There was legislation that came out of this session in 2021 that really started making that more of a permitted operation. So we certainly would talk with with your county staff if y'all want to look at any possibilities, synergies with the company, with the internet service provider or the co-ops. We've been really kind of working these special consortiums out there in the Commonwealth of Virginia and trying to come up with different areas to attack this problem within the Commonwealth of Virginia. No more so than with the COVID pandemic, with people working from home or school remotely and that need is there. So in the Northern Neck, we have we have co-ops, we have internet service provider, and then the company itself, string and fiber along, and then making the middle. There's my presentation right now. Just talks about, I just covered that one, just we're headquartered in Richmond and our customers, and then I'm on to broadband right now, so that's perfect timing. But it just talks about, right now, we have Surrey, Northern Neck, Botetourt, and Louisa just was announced last week, and then King William County as well. And more to come. So we, again, look forward, if y'all want to have that conversation as a county with the company, we're more than willing to do that. Next slide. And just talked about this, but we have our outages preparing a sheet that you should, everyone and the county staff should be receiving those, and those are public documents as well. Next slide. And then our communication portal. So we are very active within social media, also just going on your phone and being very friendly to your phone about able to report outages, find out where the outages are located, and have a lot of granular details on our web portal pages. And then just wanted, I always like this slide. This is a slide that we came out after Hurricane Isabel back in 2003, but it really gives you our restoration and recovery process, where we start at the largest amount of customers, start at the transmission line, and then work our way down from the largest amount of customers into individual customers. There are some caveats with that. Your emergency operation systems, if they're tied into anything at Dominion Energy, we're hitting those at the same time we're hitting the transmission line. So that's starting at the very beginning as well. Also, number 4, when we talk about neighborhoods and pockets of customers together, we will usually try to sweep the whole neighborhood. So it just helps everyone out to be swept under and restored if we can. That way, people that are their neighbors are not looking across the road and seeing a light on, and their power is still out, and they don't really understand why their neighbors are back on, and they're not if they're on even if they're on the same circuit. So if we can, we're going to try to sweep that whole area during an outage restoration. Sometimes we can do it, and sometimes our crews are. It's a very easy fix. They can put a fuse back on, and then they have another big job. But we'll try to get everyone really back up and running. Next slide. All right, this is Todd Flowers. Before Todd gets up here, I want to say, from a company standpoint and at a local government official with the company, a representative, liaison to the county, we want to work with the county. We want to look at projects that are designed smartly. We want to work with your constituents. Anytime we put a generation project, that means solar, battery storage, natural gas, anywhere that we have a generation hydro pump storage project, we want to make sure that everyone is understand what is coming down the road. We want to work with your constituents, and we want to have a good dialogue and really be communicating with your citizens and you. So we always like to hear. We want y'all to be the first to hear on projects and your constituents on the same time when we have a viable project that we're going to be going out for filing with a conditional use permit or any other types of permits. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd, and he's going to kind of go through how we go about doing these projects at Dominion Energy, and then we'll answer any questions if you would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, good evening. I appreciate y'all having me tonight. As James mentioned, I'm going to highlight some transformative legislation that really took place last year that's driving so many changes at Dominion Energy in the way we do business as we accelerate our transition to clean energy resources, and then how that's really transforming the Commonwealth of Virginia. In some legislation that was passed last year, there's some opportunities at the local level for additional revenues and benefits to the county that I'll touch on, and then certainly here to answer any questions you may have on our plans for solar development. As James mentioned, we want to be a community partner. We're developing our own projects now. So instead of us just buying projects from third parties, a lot of third parties that will come in from outside the state, we're looking to develop those projects ourselves from the ground up. We're stepping into land lease options or purchase options with landowners, providing benefits to those landowners. We're following the interconnection queue applications, doing all the pre-engineering, all the development to build projects to accelerate our transition to clean energy, bring benefits to the communities, and really develop a long-term, mutually beneficial project for the community. You can see on the slide here, back in 2015, we hadn't even scratched the surface on our solar development. We're just about at 1 megawatt. Today, we have over 4,000 megawatts of solar in development, construction, or operation. That number is going to go up dramatically. The kind of areas that we look at to develop are, some of them are fairly obvious, land that's flat, avoids shade, has access to our transmission system, has good frontage so that when you build the project, construction vehicles have easy access. Free of wetlands, we're very conscious of the environmental impacts, so any kind of wetlands avoidance, avoid archaeological and architectural areas of a site. So we have a list of specifications that we look at when we're going out to invest in projects. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what's really driving a lot of our transition to clean energy. Our customers want it, the communities we serve want it, but it's now also been legislatively mandated. Through the passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, we now have a renewable energy portfolio standard where by law we are required to shut down some of our fossil generation and replace that with clean energy forms. Offshore wind, solar, pump storage, all those types of investments must be made under a certain time frame that's laid out in the legislation. We're already underway in building offshore wind off the coast of Virginia Beach. That project is going really well. Energy storage is now being included. We have several projects that we're evaluating right now that were part of a request for proposals that we issued last year. Energy storage will help us store energy when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing. That way we can put that energy in the grid at those times. With solar and onshore wind, solar in and of itself, we expect we're going to have over 16,000 megawatts of solar in place in the next 15 years. And to put that in perspective, 16,000 megawatts, a single megawatt is enough energy to generate to energize about 250 homes. So this is a tremendous amount of energy. This legislation I would consider transformative. And then energy efficiency standards have been passed, which requires a company to invest more in energy efficiency. Some of the solar policy changes on the next slide that you need to be aware of. They have made changes to ways that these projects are taxed at the local level to provide counties with more options. The traditional tax structure is your machinery and tools tax. There's a tax exemption that applies to solar energy, and it does now step down from 80%, and then for the first 5 years, 70% for that second 5 years, and then steps down to 60%. Under that traditional machinery and tools tax, there is an impact to your composite index, so it affects your school funding. We heard from localities across the Commonwealth, they didn't like how they would invest in these or host these solar facilities, and then they would have an adverse impact to their composite index. Also, the State Corporation Commission depreciation schedule kind of steps down, so over time, the economic benefit to a locality would go down as the SEC depreciation of these facilities goes down. So what our legislators did in working with county officials and other stakeholders, they provided another option for localities. It's called revenue share. And you now have the option, you can pass revenue share by ordinance, and it would be countywide. That'll allow the county to collect $1,400 per megawatt of installed capacity for that solar project with no impact to your composite index. That way, you don't affect school funding, and it's a stable form of revenue for the locality, and the SEC depreciation doesn't impact the revenues you see from these facilities. Then this year, they made additional changes just approved by the governor last week. Now, every 5 years, there's a 10% increase to that revenue share amount. So it's $1,400 a megawatt, and you can expect it to increase on average 2% a year. So that provides a more stable revenue stream for localities. which I think a lot of localities are going to find advantageous. The University of Virginia and the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy developed a tool that's web-based called Soltax. And the reason UVA and DME did this was to help localities understand those two scenarios. So you can go to the website that's presented there on the presentation, put in a project scenario, and then model out the revenues that a county would get for the life of the project. I'm happy to help you walk you through that. So if you are in a scenario and you just want some guidance on how to use this tool that's been put together by UVA, you can certainly reach out to me or someone on my team. We'd be happy to step the county through those various options because it will impact the revenue that you're going to see from these facilities long term. On the next slide, another policy change or siting agreements. Siting agreements are just another mechanism by which developers can work with the locality to define specific benefits and financial contributions that will be given to the locality in exchange for hosting a project. It's something we're very interested in doing. That funding can be used for really anything at your discretion. It can be used to expand broadband. It can be used for anything in your capital improvement plan. So it really provides you an opportunity to get a chunk of money by hosting a facility for a purpose that would meet some kind of county need. And agreeing to a siting agreement, it does deem the project in substantial conformance with the comprehensive plan. So it takes that 2232 step kind of out of the process. Typically, we still go through that same criteria of looking at a 2232 process and deem that it's in substantial accord with the comprehensive plan. Some other things to note, if there's some zoning ordinances, the elements of a siting agreement can be used to supersede certain conditions in zoning. So it's really a negotiation between the project developer and the locality to encourage development of these solar facilities in your community. Some benefits of solar on the next slide. This is just a scenario. If say you have a 100 megawatt facility, not including the revenue share and not including funding through siting agreements, additional economic impacts are through just the purchase of equipment, the use of local labor. So there's yet a third way that these projects would benefit the locality through economic development. In all of our projects, we are dedicated to sourcing materials and labor to the extent practical locally. So if we need to do landscaping around a project for buffers or other ways, we certainly seek out to use local firms to provide those services. And then I'll close with kind of a schematic but typical timeline of a project. From the time that we submit a conditional use permit, you're looking at about a 4-year window before that project is going to be delivering electrons onto the grid. You know, for all of the projects that we're building today, we're doing those projects to serve our customers, to meet the mandates of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. So our intention is to file a conditional use permit, begin that preliminary engineering work, development work. It takes quite some time to enter into the PJM interconnection queue process. That process in of itself is about 2.5 to 3 years. We then file all of our projects to the State Corporation Commission for their review and approval. They'll issue a certificate of public convenience and necessity. Once we have that CPCN, then we're able to initiate construction, and that construction window is about 18 months. So from the time that we file an application to have a facility in your community, it's typically about a 4-year window. We're very interested in building a utility scale project in your locality at some point in time. When we're at a point to discuss that, we'd certainly want to be a community partner. Would like to talk to you about that very transparently and openly. All the projects that we're looking to build will be located along the transmission corridor. So it would be a transmission interconnected project, which are those larger power lines that are typically on steel structures. And I just wanted to come introduce myself to you tonight. give you an overview of some changes in legislation that we think would benefit the locality, and wanted to see if you have any additional questions for me.
Any questions from any board member? Mr. Hinkle?
Mr. Chairman, first question I have is, if you're so invested in broadband, why did it take almost 3 months for you to supply power to our local broadband suppliers' towers?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer Mr. Hinkle's question. This is the first I'm learning about this. We can certainly follow back up with you on that matter. That's the first I've heard about it, on power hooking up to those providers. And, it could be anything from easements needed to be signed, and so that was delayed, and some other stuff. So we'll investigate that and get back in touch with you on that.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my other question is, you sell this as clean energy, which is really a fallacy. What are you doing to cover the waste cost to doing with when solar panels are damaged, when they need to be replaced, and those panels have to be taken to a landfill? They are not environmentally friendly to landfill. Neither are your windmill blades. Your batteries are not environmentally friendly. The minerals that need to be mined to make your batteries aren't environmental friendly. So what is in your plan to handle all the cleanup, especially oil spills from windmills? They hold over 60 gallons of oil.
So I know on the solar side, we are very interested in recycling of the modules. We're funding a program at the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, to initiate processes to determine how do we go about establishing a module recycling program. The industry itself is still fairly young. Most of these facilities are going to be around for 35 plus years. So there is a limited number of panels that have failures that need to be replaced. But the bulk of those materials, won't be dismantled for several decades. But we are already looking at investing in recycling programs. The modules themselves are mostly glass. So there are ways and techniques where you can utilize that glass. There's some minerals that can be extracted. There's value to these modules at the end of life. So we think that this is certainly there will be a resolution to that over some point in time. I know with the energy storage, we're just now constructing the first ones today. And these lithium-ion batteries, there'll be a recycling plan associated with those. Onshore wind, it's the same. It's like we endeavor to be stewards of the environment. We certainly do not want to be loading our landfill with materials that were used to create clean energy. It doesn't do us any good to not be good stewards of the environment through clean energy generation and turn around and fill up our landfills. So, we're looking at the best practices to dispose of these materials or to recycle them as appropriate.
And then, Mr. Chairman, my last question is twofold and has to do with locality. The land that's required for these solar panels normally is good agricultural land, and there is no more agricultural land to get. So if we keep turning agricultural land, which is used to produce food and other products, over to solar farms, and then the second question is, in my experience in another state and also around here with a solar panel farm that we do have, the locals aren't getting electricity. It's going all to the big cities, and their electric costs are going down. Meanwhile, the rural community where that facility is located, we get no benefit as far as low electrical rates.
So all of our projects, when the energy hits the grid, those electrons follow the path of least resistance. So when the electrons hit the grid, those electrons do serve the local community. There are a lot of projects that were done where they would serve single customers, like a data center. Those data centers were getting the renewable energy credits from those projects. All the projects that we're building going forward are for our clean energy compliance program for this part of the VCEA. That energy will be serving the local load. As we transition away from fossil fuel, we're replacing all that power generation with these new forms of energy to serve our customers. So those electrons will be serving this community and other communities across Virginia that are our rate-paying customers. From a land perspective, yeah, these projects do take a lot of land, 8 to 9 acres per megawatt. And it comes down to question of land use. I know there are concerns about, turning agricultural land for this type of production. At the end of the day, landowners decide what's the most and best use for their property. Instead of growing other types of products, we're essentially farming the sun. In a lot of ways, you're preserving that land from being developed for other more detrimental uses. After those 35 years, we are required to bring the land back to its original condition. So it can still be used for agricultural purposes at the end of the project's life. It's really one of the most or least destructive forms of development because we don't tax the local community. You don't need water, sewer, more schools. It's just really converting a farming of crops or, animals in farms. So it's something we're looking at. It does, I can't deny that it doesn't use a lot of land because it does. But it's, up to a landowner to decide what's the best use.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for this, but my next question, since we've seen this disaster in Texas where all the clean energy was wiped out and there was nothing to back it up, if we're closing the fossil fuel plants, how are we going to protect ourselves in the case of a disaster like Texas?
So we could be here for 3 hours to talk about ERCOT and the situation in Texas. But yeah, our grid is very different than ERCOT, for one thing.
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer this question is to what Mr. Flowers just said. We have a really broad, vast of energy sources that we can pull from. Our grid is a little bit different, where we are a part of a regional grid system as well that we can pull in energy. And our customers, Dominion Energy customers, and others that are members of that grid can also benefit. They have too much load, they can go elsewhere too, and that gets discounted on the bill when they go through that. But to answer your question, we like an all-of-above approach. So that includes when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, you need something else. You're absolutely right, and that's natural gas. That's also nuclear. That's also our coal plants that we have operation right now at Clover Power Station down the road, Virginia City Hybrid Energy Center in far southwest Virginia. So we do have, you do have the emerging technology of battery storage and solar, but that's not enough to power the grid today, to your point. And so that's why we are making sure we do the investments and we make sure that our equipment at the power stations we winterize our systems. And that's what a lot of things happened in Texas as well. They were not winterizing their systems. We invest that money, and that's why we're in a regulated system. And that allows us to have the benefit of not having these brownouts and blackouts that other parts of the country experienced recently.
Yeah, we have a very different market. In Texas, they don't have a capacity market. In PJM, there's 2 revenue streams that power generators get. They get revenue from actually selling the electrons. But then they also get revenue by essentially telling the system operator that if I'm called upon to operate, I'll be there, and they call that the capacity market. So PJM always makes sure there's a sufficient capacity to meet system load. The market dynamics in Texas are very different. It's a deregulated market, very different than PJM and the way that we operate in the transmission system.
Any other, Mr. Evans?
This is more a statement than a question. First, I want to thank y'all for coming here. We appreciate. I think Dominion has been a good corporate citizen over the years. But you're here talking about solar power, and one, thank you for saying you affect our school funding, which these projects do, and the reason they affect our composite index is because the tax breaks you all, whether you have or the solar, have gotten through. We've had one solar company that's looking to come in and say, oh, no, you don't affect the composite index? Absolutely. And the way we're going now, even with the tax breaks, even with the negotiated, what you're talking about, these people in this audience, we're going to have to raise their taxes for education funds if we keep putting these solar panels because of the tax breaks you've got. Also, if I represent my constituents, and all this solar and wind energy is in the very near future going to double electric bills for my constituents because it costs money, and you all, I don't blame you, you got the right through the legislation to pass all those costs along to us. So for me personally, I don't think solar energy is something that helps Appomattox until you take these tax breaks away and pay taxes just like every other business that comes here. You don't bring jobs in. You can talk about using local people. But once you construct this, there's no jobs hooked up with it. And there's not much advantage for us at all. And I don't see any advantage. The truth is, and I hope that this board doesn't accept any more solar for this county, and that I understand there are counties that want it. But that's why I hope you all go to those counties that want it and not to those of us who think you'll raise our taxes.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I too want to thank y'all for coming and providing some insight, especially to the new legislation. And the composite index is a big part of our concerns. On one of your slides, you talked about the revenue sharing option, and in that it said that if you do that, then you're 100% exempt from property tax. Is that an either or, and is that personal property tax or is that real estate tax?
So there's two forms of taxation: the machinery and tools tax, or revenue share. And the machinery and tools tax is the traditional way that a facility like this would be taxed. It's an either or. You can pass an ordinance that would, in lieu of collecting taxes through M&T tax, you'd collect it through the revenue share. And in doing so, there's no impact to your composite index. When you collect taxes through your traditional M&T tax, those revenues get counted as income to the county, and it reduces the amount of state funding the state would otherwise provide the locality for schools. Revenue share doesn't have that same impact. There'd be no reduction in state funding because there's no impact to your composite index when you take that flat rate, $1,400 a megawatt hour.
Okay, so that's for M&T only. It doesn't affect personal property.
It's M&T only.
And I guess if you're leasing this land, so the property owner, in most instances, doesn't affect their real estate taxes.
We're leasing and buying. Okay. So depending on what the landowner's preference is, some landowners would rather sell their land, and we would buy the land under a purchase option. In other instances, we're stepping into a long-term lease, typically 35 to 40 years. And I'm not a tax guy, so I don't want to give any tax guidance, but sure, that's my general understanding of the difference between the M&T tax and the revenue share.
And if I could follow up one more time. So you were talking about 8 to 9 acres per megawatt of generation.
Correct.
All right, so I guess you're generating in gigawatts. So how many megawatts would it take to satisfy your capacity for your grid today?
Well, the mandate is for 16,100 megawatts. And 1 megawatt generates enough load to energize about 250 homes of the average size.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we appreciate you all coming and talking with us, and have a good trip, safe trip back to your destination.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and I would be remiss if I didn't add, we would be, if you want to tour a solar facility, either in construction or in operation, please let me know, and I'll follow up with your county administrator, and we'd love to entertain y'all at one of these facilities as well, a Dominion-owned facility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank them also for coming and for their quick answers. Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Kelly Hitchcock from CVDPC, DC, Hazard Mitigation Plan 2020 update. Welcome, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm going to move quickly. I know you have a full agenda. I'm here. Oh, thank you so much. Here to talk about the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. This plan, it is a regional plan, so it represents all the localities within the planning district, and it was led, each locality had a designated member on that technical advisory, and Appomattox County was very well represented by Bobby Wingfield and Johnny Rourke. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Well, you gave me instructions, and I'm not very good at. Just quickly, the hazard mitigation plan, it is a required document by FEMA in order to be eligible for a number of their federal funding. The hazard mitigation grant program and what is now the Building Resilience Infrastructure and Community Program, which is called the BRIC program. That used to be the pre-mitigation program. And ultimately, the hazard mitigation plan is a way to look at your risks and vulnerabilities associated with natural hazards and developing strategies to minimize the impact. You can't stop tornadoes, but what you can do is think about what can you do to minimize the impact on especially public infrastructure of localities. So that's why we're here. The hazard mitigation plan, again, at the ultimate is it's got your natural hazards, it's your community assets, and you're looking at your risk. The hazard mitigation plan, it's 7 chapters. It's a big document. There's no denying that, 800 and some odd pages, but you know, it's regional, so you're just looking with Appomattox. The first 3 chapters are your pretty basic, the how, the when, the localities. The meat of the document is that 4th chapter where you're talking about those hazard mitigations, the individual breakdown of those 20 hazards. The capabilities assessment, that's when you look at the capabilities of each locality. What are your planning capabilities? And that's important because you want to make sure you develop strategies which match your capabilities within a locality. A town's capabilities do not match a county's capabilities. And then ultimately the mitigation strategies. And then lastly, the monitoring and maintenance. And in full disclosure, this was really an area where we didn't do a good job in the past hazard mitigation plan. We didn't march and follow the plan over 5 years and give credit where credit was due to the things that localities did, where that's what's not going to happen again. So we have a maintenance plan to this document. And then quickly, we have a website. It's very comprehensive. It's easy to use, cvpdchmp.org. This is just what you would see if you go to the main site, the tabs at the top. You would click where you have hazards, and we have a very detailed for each of those 20 hazards. On that left side, you can see you have map and the breakdown. And for each locality, we developed a dashboard. So that's a dashboard within the flood chapter, if you click this. And that's really important. As I said, we didn't maintain this document, so we have this dashboard. And it gives certain information about each locality, how many flood insurance policies the locality has, how many instances for insurance or calls go in. So obviously within those 5 years, like the tornado that came. And that's really important. Again, this is the year that is our baseline, and we'll upgrade this every year and give the information to you as a locality. And then obviously the document has maps. And the thing about that is those are great, but they're pretty hard to see in print. And so what's important is when you go on the website, it's an interactive with each of the hazards. You have an interactive capability. That's what you would see if you went to the flood map. And you can get to that through the website. But then you can toggle in and you can get very specific information about your locality. And each of those locations are vulnerable structures. So kind of what I'm showing there is a bridge in Appomattox that's a vulnerable structure and that it's in the flood zone. And so it's a way it can be monitored over time and give you a mechanism to sort of grade ourselves when it makes sense. And then obviously the strategies, those things that can be done. And it's very important to point out it's things that can be done. The hazard mitigation plan, it is not a they shall. So it's not a CIP. If it's mentioned in the hazard mitigation plan, there are things that can be done, if the funding comes available and those type of things, but it makes no commitment by any locality. The strategies are broken up on information. Those are those low-hanging fruit that really your staff already does, but it's about a way we can sort of get cohesive language throughout the region. So what someone hears in Appomattox about storm readiness would be the same thing they hear on the backside of Bedford County. Then you have prevention capacity, things like generators, property protection, structural projects, and natural system resiliency projects. Those are those high-dollar projects where you're, engineering and those type of things. So obviously you don't want to have too many of those, but there are some in there. And then most importantly, Appomattox strategies. Appomattox identified 19 strategies, and again, of those 19 strategies, those first few in information and outreach, you'll basically see that wording in all 10 of the localities. But within the county's 19 strategies, there are about 11 that are very specific to Appomattox. So, and you were given the link so you could look at these, and again, they can be seen very easily on the website. I about did it again, sorry. And again, more strategies for property protection. And I needed different glasses because I definitely can't see what I'm about to show you here. But you should have seen the links. And again, so you can see, again, those are very specific strategies. One there about some roads where we know their flooding is out there. And so it's an opportunity to work with VDOT to take opportunities as they arise. And then we're here this evening to talk about the adoption process. VDIM reviewed the document in October. We had honestly a third public process. We met FEMA's requirements back in June of 2020 for public meeting, but we felt with COVID that we all owed it to ourselves to have another comment period. So we had a third comment period in October and November. We submitted to FEMA. They asked for a few little changes, basically grammatical type things, and then FEMA provided the approval pending adoption on January 22nd. And what that means is the document meets FEMA's requirements, and then it's pending adoption because that's pending the localities adopting the plan. And when once a locality has adopted that plan, you're eligible for that funding. And it's a 5-year document, and the 5-year countdown or the switch gets flipped when the first locality of the regional plan adopted, and the light switch got flipped on the 8th of February by the town of Appomattox when they adopted, and so it's 4 years and 364 days from that point. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Ms. Hitchcock? Well, thank you. We appreciate you coming down and telling us about your plan here, the adoption and all. We got to change one thing on the resolution. Down at the bottom says Amber's got to change that.
Oops, yeah, I apologize.
But thank you.
Sorry about that. You're very welcome. And again, it was a great team that you had here in the county.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Floor is open for discussion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you just stated what I was going to point out, that we need to change the resolution.
What's the board's pleasure in regards to this resolution?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we adopt the resolution with the correction removing Amherst County and inserting Appomattox.
Motion been duly made. Is there a second? Second. Further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed likewise. Okay, next item is item number 6, Sheriff's Department, request for a generator. Ms. Adams.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wingfield is available tonight to address any questions, but he had given some suggestions for funding and possibilities of connectivity. We've been talking, and there's a good possibility that if we do get that CARES money, that would be an eligible expense out of that. So I'm not sure if how the board would like to proceed. But Mr. Wingfield does have another suggestion. I'm not sure if you want to hear that tonight or would like for him to meet with his committee.
Well, no, come on, we're here from tonight. Being the night is young, it's just 4 minutes to 6.
Mr. Chairman. I just, with talking with Ms. Adams, just want to gauge which direction we kind of want to go with this. There's several possibilities out there. As Ms. Hitchcock just said, one is the hazard mitigation plan, but that takes a longer time for that grant, and it could take over a year for that one. The other one is the Homeland Security grant, and that's currently open right now. And it's going to end on April 30th. It's a lot of stuff we want to cover for the grant. You know, we can get what a generator costs. We can get what the switchover panel is going to cost, you know, from a vendor. But what gets you is I wish Dominion Power was still here, but those big old copper cables is going to be laid in the ground to and from the nearest transformer that's going to be shared, and the panel switches inside whichever buildings you want to do. So it'll be a lot of construction inside these buildings, the county administration building, the sheriff's office building, if you're going to go with a two-building strategy. With that, the one thing is we can generate as a shared project, and I talked to Cummins about that, whereas you have both generators kind of in sync, and it can have controls of what can be served, what's not. Or you can go with the generator to serve each building independently, you know, because then it cuts back on the cabling and the wiring and on the switchover panels. So I didn't know what direction the board wanted to go with this, because there's so many moving parts. It's hard to focus on one, because you spend a lot of energy on this, then we want to pivot to go to another one. And so, but as Ms. Adams explains, the CARES money is the least resistance way. And if it's going to be as much as y'all discussed tonight, it may be a possibility to do that. But I just want to gauge on where you want to go with this project.
Well, Mr. Winfield, I think at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong from other board members, but due to the what's been discussed tonight, we need to find out more pieces of the puzzle, if you will, and we probably need to table this until a later date.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I know that the sheriff has communicated with you guys. He wants something as quickly as possible. So, you know, but as quickly as possible, and like you say, the moving parts to get the puzzles fitted correctly. So it might take a little bit of time for this until we know exactly what's coming to us and what we can do. But I just wanted to relay that, you know, that interest is still there with the sheriff, and rightly so.
Oh, yes. Is that the consensus of the board?
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hogan.
So I know when this came up last month, it was discussed that we didn't think that the current generator was being used at full capacity. Have we been able to determine whether that generator is maxed out, or what's the status with that one?
With the current engineer that we have that helped when we built an I-1 center, as he explained it, is it was a large generator. It was an oversized generator for what was used for the courthouse. So to save money, when we for the 911 center, we used that generator capacity instead of purchasing a second generator put behind the 911 center. And so those cables are run underground back and forth. You don't know what's even there. But what's different with our situation and with data centers and with 911 centers is that UPS that I mentioned last month during the budget. And that is a animal different than any other thing. Because we have a 40 kV UPS generator. So for the storage for that, we got to have a built-in capacity of 120 kV for that. And that's not even our regular load that we have. And I believe the electrical vendor said we average around 70, for us. So what that means is when we go down on power, then we own battery 100%. And then the time it takes the generator to start up, it can be anywhere from 15 seconds to 30 seconds. If I have a failure, it'll keep on trying. It may take 3 minutes. But usually I have 15 to 20 minutes in my UPS before it's completely drained. So for instance, if it generator took 5 to 6 minutes to start up, to get up to the amperage, and the switchover comes to me, then what happens, that whole load of the 40 plus the battery load goes and the capacity, so I can triple my slam factor on that generator. Because you have these generators, they say you have a 5,000 watt generator, but you have a 6250 surge when you buy these generators from the market. That's what goes on with this generator, is that we have a 250 rating for that generator for the power surge, but it's a constant 200 kW generator. But with the UPS in there, it will be a slam factor that it has to power that UPS immediately up. So it ramps it up to the whole capacity, and then it will nose back down, and then it will level out to just a regular generator works. When this is what I call for, this is what I want. It's similar to if you're used to your home generator, when you turn on your well pump and you hear that grind down, because that well pump it costs more juice to it until that well pump gets going, then it comes back up. It's that type of stuff. Also, have a retiree engineer that he assisted me and helped me out. And did I explain it correctly? Close. Because, this type of electrical stuff, it's complicated. That's why with the 911 centers, you have electrical engineers to figure this in. It's not like a home load or a building load that you can figure and make that decision.
So the answer is yes?
It's max.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted to go into that. So I know you like to know these things.
Any other questions?
I would like to just add one thing, and I think Mr. Wingfield can address that better than me, but one thing that was mentioned, the courthouse lighting is on that generator as well with his. And we talked about not having heat in that building. So what was determined was they could hook the boiler system up at a minimal capacity, and should still be okay because it's divided in the generator itself between the courthouse and the 911. So if it hits that capacity, it can default and shut down the courthouse side. Is that some hair sense?
Is that?
If I may, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wingfield was indicating having 40,000 watts UPS in 5 minutes, 20 minutes, you're going to have 3 times the load on the generator with the capacity of UPS, which is around 120 kilowatts, plus regular loads, whatever something else is put, which is max out capacity. And the other loads on generator will trip the circuit breaker or shut down the generator. Boiler, big no. Boilers. We discussed this for 2 days, and there's some other options Mr. Wingfield can present it, but I would say strongly, after physically verify the values, no. It's impossible. Lights fine, small appliances fine, small heaters, boilers, big no. In the moment when the first 20, 30 minutes of when UPS stop working, when go back to the power from generator, the moment when the generator is starting and UPS working, like Mr. Wingfield indicated, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the period of time is, the demand from East 911 is 120 kilowatts. It's no physical way to avoid this, which means you have only 70 kilowatts available, which his center is pulling. Which means right there, you're almost at the capacity when the battery is charged back. I mean, later on, the load is decreasing. But this period of time, we are close to the capacity of the generator.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now, I don't want to, if you did a manual start and not an automatic start, because you're not going to have that boiler on the UPS. So the boiler's going to stop because the power is not going to be there until the generator starts up to power back up. If you had a manual that if it went down and stayed down until 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, because there's no need for the boiler to start back up, because then possibly after 30 minutes, you manually start the boiler, then it won't be calling, everything won't be calling forward at the same time. And that's what I call it, Mr. A, we'll figure out, to do. So that is a possibility for that. So,
Okay.
you can do that.
Because at no given time do you use the full capacity except at startup.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a slam factor.
Right.
For that. So you could go into, and you could start the pumps, or you could start that, and it will carry it because it's already generating, it's not going to hit it, except for that one time when that boiler starts up. But it should have that capacity in there then.
Right.
For that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Winkfield.
Okay.
Gentlemen, there, too. Okay. Next is the Town of Pamplin, the Community Development Block Grant. And this is the mayor.
Thank you again. My name is Sarah Blackwell. Thank you again for having us here to discuss this. I know that it was tabled the last time, but there's been some communication with Susan and with our grants writer as well. I do have several individuals here from the town, both property owners, investors, and whatnot, as well as the Highbridge Trail State Park, a representative from there, just to kind of, help us relay just how important it is for the revitalization of this community.
Well, I think we could save you a whole lot of time, a whole lot of effort. Mr. Hogan.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the planning grant, being the fiduciary agent for the town of Pamplin's planning grant. Be happy to accept that responsibility and do that for you. Now, the next big grant might be some different story, but maybe the folks at Central Virginia Planning District Commission, while she's here, you may want to talk to her before you leave. Maybe they could help you with that, but I'd make a motion that we handle the planning grant for them.
Motion duly made, is that second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Well, that was much less than I expected. You guys are great.
Next is the J. Robinson Jameson Memorial Library, State Library Funds. So it's no new local funds for that. We don't need to do anything on that, Ms. Allen?
They just need to be appropriated to these line items.
Okay, is there a
As
motion?
additional funding received from the FY '21.
Okay, is there a motion to that effect? Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Hinkle? Mr. Hips? Mr. Abbott? Mr. Hogan?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Next is the school appropriation request. Well, you have it before you. Yes, sir, Mr. Abbott.
Talked earlier that ADM from the state won't be in here until April. And I don't think, if I could ask Ms. Adams, this money wasn't advertised in the budget. We advertised, is that correct?
That's correct. It wasn't approved or appropriated. The board said they would take into consideration at the end of December.
I really think we ought to wait till we get the definite ADM before we move on this. Which is the official ADM.
Right.
In this month.
Comments from other board members?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hogan?
it does, and I know we've been appropriating quarterly, so I guess we're going to be doing that again next month. Is there any reason that the school would need the appropriation this month as opposed to next month?
There was not identified in the letter from Dr. Bennett, except she asked for a cushion amount between the 2% and 3%. The only thing this would have to be appropriated is new funds, because it'd be amending the FY21 budget.
We would need a public hearing, though, because it's lower than the threshold.
Yeah, I haven't done the math, but I'm not sure if it's within that 1%.
So if it does require a public hearing, and we wait till next month, then we won't have it, public hearing until May. I just want to make sure they don't run out of money before we have an opportunity to vote on this.
Let me see. I think Dr. Bennett is on the line, prepared to address any questions.
I can unmute her. I'll just make a motion that if we table it, but that if it requires a public hearing, we have a public hearing in April, we'll do that. Should it require it, that we table this until next month, it should require public hearing. We have to set a public hearing anyway, so everybody within, if it requires it, then we authorize you to set the public hearing and do advertising for it for the April meeting. That work?
If we have adequate time for advertising after the May 31st ADM number.
Well, we
March
really,
10 days.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we can advertise without having an ADM. I mean, we can do a public hearing if we don't have, without the ADM, it's just, we gotta have a public hearing if it's over the 1%. So, what we're saying is, we will set a public hearing for this amount, if it's determined by you it's over 1%. Doesn't matter whether we appropriate it or not, I think is when we look at the ADM.
I think we would have to have a motion that that's the intent of the board, right?
Yeah, I mean, he can
For that
make
money.
I mean, his motion is, I
New
think
money.
it sounds like a motion. The motion
Yeah.
is that you're empowered to advertise if it's necessary.
Yeah.
We would table it till the next
Are
meeting.
they approving that amount? It's new money.
The county administrator is authorized
Yeah.
to set a public hearing if we need one.
So you would have to approve that amount and authorize staff to advertise.
Yes.
No, we're not going to approve the amount. We would approve the amount after the public hearing. There's no use to have a public hearing if you're going to approve the amount before the public hearing.
Are you saying for this amount of money, the public
What I'm
hearing
doing
be
is
held?
we table appropriating this amount. And if it need, until next month, and we get, of course, we're gonna get the ADM. But I'm just saying, if it is determined that this is over the 1%, then we authorize you to have a public hearing next month so we can move on. That make sense?
Is that part of your motion, approve that amount and
I
all?
think he's making the motion.
Okay.
I'm not saying approve that amount. You've got to approve that amount after the public hearing.
But
I'm saying we table approving the amount till next month. And if we have to have a public hearing, then you authorize it. If we don't, we'll act on appropriating that money next month. So I'm not saying, there's no reason to have a public hearing if we're gonna go on and appropriate the money. So all I'm saying is, this is tabled till next month. And I was trying to solve his problem with saying we'd have to have a public hearing, rather than put it off to next month. If we didn't do this, you'd have to have a public hearing in May. So, that's all I'm saying is, if we need a public hearing on this amount of money. And if we do need a public hearing on this amount of money, we can't authorize it tonight anyway. Without a public hearing.
It's
Okay,
a-
Ms. Adams?
Yes, sir. I'm just making sure that we can put that amount of money in our advertisement if we have to publicly advertise it. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, motion's made. Is there a second? Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hogan?
I just want to make sure if Dr. Bennett is on the phone, is there any comments she has?
Ace?
Good evening. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My quick math says it's not 1%, but if you all want to table this until the March 31st ADM, that's fine. I can work with Ms. Adams on that, and we can make sure that you all have all the information you need. This is the information that I gave you at the joint board meeting, just about the difference in what the state requires us to get state.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bennett.
Sure.
Motion made, second. Any additional discussion? We have roll call vote. Mr. Hinkle? Mr. Hips? Mr. Abbott? Mr. Hogan? I also vote aye. Once again, thank you, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, next is a Copper Price Legacy Museum request. At the February 16th, 2021 BOS meeting, Mrs. Janice Marston, Ms. Annie Trent, and other members of the Copper Price Museum appeared before the board to request the following, and you can see the three items that were discussed. In connection with that, the floor is open for discussion. Does everybody else?
Chairman?
Go ahead.
I guess I have a question about the changing the lease from one incorporation to another one. And has the corporation that we currently have the lease with, have they agreed to this? To not further lease it and let somebody else lease it? I realize there's some combination of people on this, on both corporations. I just want to make sure legally, have we got all our i's dotted and t's crossed?
I think we have representation here that,
Well, I think the
Well, we
lady
did.
just walked out.
okay. Harry's here.
We have to verify that. I don't know if it's the existing organization's been renamed or it's a new organization, but we would verify all that before. You notice the recommendation is to defer this anyway because we need to gather some data.
Thank you.
Well, until we find out more information that each of us may have or may not have, we'll take this up on the next month's agenda, Ms. Adams. Mr. Abbott.
I really think if we're going, I had thought it might be the thing to do to transfer the property to us. I don't know if, I hear now that some of that board doesn't think we ought to transfer the property. I think we should, but I'd like to know, what are we talking about in the lease? What part of the building? I am told, what only the kids say, that the grant they received from the General Assembly is for auditorium. I don't know whether it's auditorium or cafeteria or what it is, but we ought to know the particulars of that, because there's a lot of area between present museum and auditorium that somebody's got to make a decision on. So
Yep.
we really need to nail that down, and
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Some of that's addressed in this package. of
That's what I was
space.
asking about the legends, yeah.
Yeah, it's the Rosenwall and 2 additional rooms on the front of the school. And then they want a second lease for the auditorium. But I think since we're talking about some of the specifics of the lease, county attorney's prepared to talk in closed session about that
Yes, ma'am.
prior to taking a vote.
Yes. Okay, so for right now, we'd pass over this. Mr. Hinkle.
in answer to Mr. Hogan's questions about the attached documents they have here, they have this document signed October 2016. It says, the following was amended, the Carver Price Larry Museum Committee shall be severed from the Alumni Association, and they will form their own incorporated association so they control their own destiny. I think, is that what you're trying to address, Mr. Hogan? So it looks like they already did that in October of 2016.
I guess just Mr. Lashley can address that later in closed session maybe, but I just want to make sure our lease isn't with the new people yet. It's still with the old people.
That's when you talk about the legal
And,
issues around this.
right. Even though they've created the new organization.
Any other discussion? Okay. Next is committee appointments, Board of Zoning Appeals appointment. We need to be prepared to present recommendations at the April 2021 meeting for an appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals to fill the unexpired term ending June the 30th, 2022 of Mr. James Cheatham, who passed away in January 2021. Board of Supervisors submits recommendation to the judge for appointment, so we need to put our thinking caps on and talk to folks who would like to be a part of the zoning board, zoning of appeals. Next is a consent agenda that we have before us. Consent agenda includes approval of bills, minutes, supplemental appropriations, line item transfers, and fund transfers. Any item on the consent agenda shall be removed from the consent agenda at the request of any board member prior to the vote of the consent agenda. Items removed from the consent agenda shall be considered by the board individually in order in which they were removed from the consent agenda immediately following consideration of the consent agenda. So I hope everyone's had an opportunity to look over the payment of the bills and et cetera of the year. Any questions from anyone? Any concerns or issues?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion, we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion duly made, is that second? Motion been second. Additional conversation? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Hinkle.
Aye.
Mr. Hibbs. Mr. Abbott. Mr. Hogan.
Aye.
Okay. No, so, Mr. Latchney.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick issue. There was a question raised about a planning commission appointment that was not technically made by district, which is the Falling River District. And the question was asked whether it's required by law that planning commissioners be appointed by district. The short answer is it's not. State law has no requirement of that they live in the county. Our county ordinance says we may appoint by district, but aren't required to. I'll point out that we have an at-large member who's currently in that district. So even though technically the official appointment would have been for that district, we still have an at-large. So, you know, if the board chooses, you could flip them and make them district representative. But there's no requirement that we live by district all the time.
Okay, great. Any other items, Mr. Latchney?
That is it, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Adams?
No report.
Next is reports and informational items that we have before us. Supervisor concerns, Mr. Hinkle.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a constituent that's really upset about the amount of trash on the road leading to the Promised Land Convenience Center, and I was wondering if there's anything to be done about trash cleanup along the roads, and I have a similar concern over Evergreen Road and Cub Creek, or not Old Bethany, I mean, road is just going to Evergreen. Trash is just littered, and I don't know, is that a VDOT responsibility for road cleanup?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm glad you said something earlier, because Ms. Adams and I was in conversation today and en route to Lynchburg Saturday. Yeah, I hope a lot of people saw that. I mean, Sunday, on heading westbound at Spout Springs, I ain't never seen so much trash in my born days. Trash is everywhere I know throughout the Commonwealth. gonna have it, that's it. But this is ridiculous, what they had up there. But Ms. Adams has already taken care of that with, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Ms. Adams. Yes. Mr. Hips. Mr. Abbott.
One thing, I don't know what the citizen board is, but I talked about, I thought maybe we ought to give rather than leasing the Legacy Museum, is give it to it. Now, when I mentioned that the other night, we got a lot of applause. And now I understand one member of the board has said, no, we don't want it. So could we, you think before our next meeting or before we do this, we could get a resolution from them at whether they want to take title to it or not? I'm not saying we do that, but we're getting a mixed signal, so.
It's a good idea.
Does that board want it or don't they?
Exactly. Ms. Adams, you notated that?
Yes, sir.
And one other thing, I might. If they don't want title to it, any lease we do with them should say that any building code upgrade should be on them, not on us, if we keep title to the bill.
Right.
You look at it, you know, if you've got a grant to do work in it, and you've got to upgrade the electrical in it, it could get fairly expensive. And if the
Right.
building owner, if it's up to the building owner to do it, then, you know, that should be part of the lease, I think.
Very good.
I apologize,
Hips?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I shook my head when you asked me if I had anything.
That's all right.
I did already get an email from a constituent thanking us for passing a resolution, so I just want to extend that to everybody. And I do want to, and I think everybody here knows, you know, the potential emergency status to this generator for the sheriff's department. But as someone in mental health, I just want to further, you know, state that I definitely want us to see us address that problem sooner than later. And I think everybody agrees that it's an issue. But when you shut down the court system and you have emergency custody orders and things like that that are placed on people and there's no court system open, then I believe that you have to go to another, they would have to take that person, you could probably help me with this, take that person to another court within our jurisdictional district, which is not Lynchburg, which is, what, Prince Edward, the next? To
Yes.
drive them to Farmville or something? So is it-
Farmville or Buckingham or Charlotte.
you know, hopefully, I can't tell, I don't know how many times we haven't had electricity over there, but this is a strange situation. But just that, in the event this does happen, it's a significant issue and logistics nightmare to have the court system shut down like that. So I hope that, you know, maybe the COVID money or whatever, I just hope that we can solve the problem soon.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I might
Dabbit.
follow up on that, keep going on. I think putting a generator in, we need to do what's most efficient we can. But if we've got to have one in the sheriff, maybe Bobby could look into just leasing a generator that would meet the sheriff's capacity until we can make the decision on it. If it's that important, then you ought to be able to lease one fairly inexpensive.
Well, definitely need to make this fast forward, no question. Mr. Hogan.
Y'all have already brought up the trash, and I saw the same thing. And it's 460 from county line to county line. And I think it's probably more noticeable now because they ran the mowers over it and scattered it everywhere. But yeah, it is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. And I don't know, we used to have the sheriff's office used to have a roadside cleanup crew. And I think that got put on hold because of COVID maybe, but I think we got plenty of work they could be doing. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
I don't have anything other than recognizing the county treasurer is with us tonight, and thank you for coming in.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Wingfield.
I had these earlier. We do have another generator, but listen to the discussion. I like what Mr. Jeff said and Mr. Anderson, but we do have this at the primary school, and it has been used with the tornado. So I was thinking about relocating it, but with the money that's becoming available, with the money that's gonna be coming available, I don't wanna have the expense of doing that and then backing up and then we were back. But I just wanna let you know, we do have this in a shelter with our agreement in our emergency operations plan, and it's with the Red Cross for this. But I just wanna bring that to your attention. And I can act, we can have it in, it's not the whole building, we can do something to upgrade the 40-year-old generator that's there now temporarily to, we can get something, efficient for the whole building.
Okay, thank you. This is one they got from B&W?
Yes, sir.
That's what I thought. Okay, we need to go into closed session. Mr. Latchney.
All right. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Appomattox County desires to discuss in closed meeting the following matters: consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters, parentheses, legal advice by such counsel concerning animal control, harbor price lease, and eminent domain law. And whereas pursuant to section 2.23711A8 of the Code of Virginia, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Appomattox County is hereby authorized discussion of forestated matters in closed meeting. Need that as a motion.
Is that a second? Second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All right. We might be able to meet in here.
properly exempted from open meeting requirements, and that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Yes.
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 Okay. There's an item that, we need to talk about, we're back in regular session. We're back in regular session. Mr. Hill. Won't pass my bedtime. I don't think we need that motion. Yeah, we don't, we're good. Okay, we're good, all right. Well then,